Hello, everybody. This is Jacqueline Hanna with the Food Co-op Initiative.
And hey, this is Bonnie Hudspeth with the Neighboring Food Co-op Association.
And you're watching Food
Co-ops
Now. Hi, everybody. You might have noticed that this week there's an extra picture down at the bottom of the screen. We're so excited to introduce our first guest of Food Co-ops Now, Darnell Adams. But before we introduce Darnell and have her share about herself and her work, we want to tell you why we were moved to invite Darnell to be our first guest.
So recently, Darnell wrote an article that was published in this summer, 2020, the issue of Nonprofit Quarterly, and the article is called "For Food Co-ops, the Future is Now." And to help those watching understand why we immediately asked Darnell to be our first Food Co-ops Now guest, we'd like to read the first couple sentences of the article. Now is the time for food co-ops, food co-op consultants, and funders to move from thoughts and prayers about social and economic inequities to dealing with issues of power. The food co-op community is tasked to do more than build and sustain grocery stores. We need to address social justice and wealth inequality.
Whoosh. So see, you know, after hearing that, exactly why we invited Darnell to be our first guest, and we feel incredibly lucky that she was able to find the time to sit down and talk with us today.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
So before we dive into the meat of your article, we'd like to just let our audience know a little more about you. Can you share with us a little bit about how you've been involved in the co-op movement and what your work is today?
Sure. I actually initially was involved with something that sort of resembled cooperative economics, but wasn't quite that. And it kind of gave me the taste to learn more. I was managing a shared kitchen, which folks in Boston who had ideas about growing a business that was a food business could actually share a shared space. And in that way, there was way more participation than typical in kind of early stage food businesses in Boston, because there was a way in which there was a level playing field where people could actually get involved, actually start their businesses without having the amount of cash that normally it would take for an entrepreneur to start a business. With that, there was this opportunity after that I learned about in Dorchester, a neighborhood in Boston, to become a project manager for a co-op that was developing there. And I jumped at the chance because I actually did see the link between what I had been doing before and also kind of developing a food co-op in the neighborhood. So that's how I got involved. And I was in that project for about 2.5 years, really fell in love with the co-op model, what it was about, what it stood for. And from there, took my experience, business experience, cooperative experience, and got together with a group of incredible people to start Firebrand Cooperative about 1.5 years ago. Excellent. So, and quickly about Firebrand, we are a small firm that works on change management for cooperatives, nonprofits, other for-profit but socially responsible businesses, and we do kind of a bunch of different work, including project management, training, and also brand identity.
As well as leadership coaching, last I knew. And I know you've been involved in all sorts of different, it must be interesting and expanding. You've been involved in different aspects of the cooperative movement since going to Firebrand. I know you've spoken to electric co-op groups, to organizations that train new co-op developers, startup food co-ops, mature food co-ops, and just gotten a much broader view. And I do wonder if that kind of influenced where you went with this article.
Oh, I keep kind of remembering the moment that the title actually popped into my head. Mm-hmm. And I thought, and I don't remember it being as clear as, well, I've had these experiences and with a variety of businesses, a variety of co-ops in different sectors, and this applies certainly to all of them. I remember it being more about what would happen if someone at this point, a client, were to ask, me to do a implicit bias training, which is part of the work that I do. What would I say in this moment that would be relevant, that would make sense, that would not feel kind of not big enough for the moment?
Mm-hmm.
And it did feel to me that the same conversations that we were having in the cooperative movement were not enough. That something needed to be kind of explicitly said and clear about the direction that we should be going in, as opposed to the conversations that are nice, but sometimes don't produce action and movement.
Right. I noted that with the whole thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers are nice. What are we going to actually do about it as a movement? I appreciated that call. So what led you to write the article at this specific moment, Darnell? Because it sounds like you've been having these thoughts for a while.
You know, it kind of all kind of coalesced in a way where I thought to myself, oh my gosh, and at that point it was March, so we didn't know how long the pandemic would go on and what the effects would be. But I maybe assumed, like, all right, in 6 months, when things go back to normal, silly me, where will we be as a cooperative movement, as a food cooperative movement?
Yeah.
What would that look like? And I just started to imagine it. And I, be honest with you, felt a great deal of sadness over the fact that I thought maybe we would end up being exactly what we've been. Like, there would be no change. There would be this moment in which food co-ops have rose to the occasion in the emergency situation of COVID.
Yeah.
But somehow that we would just sort of slip back to what we've always been doing, conversations we've always been having, and not having the sense of urgency. And so the article is kind of, there's a lot of things that are packed in there, but one of them was just that ask, you know, the rallying cry of sorts to say, not tomorrow, not in 6 months, not in a year, and not in 10 years should we be having the same discussion. It's now. The time is now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that comes up a great deal in the article. In the article, we actually say, and I'm going to quote here, food co-ops are not immune to the dominant culture, but we do have a responsibility to live up to our principles. And I think that's the end of the quote there. That the implication, to my read, is that the U.S. food co-op movement is not fully living up to the 7 cooperative principles when it comes to dealings of issues of power and racism. Can you speak a little more to what you meant there, if I heard you correctly, and what exactly you're pointing to within the co-op principles that the movement's not meeting?
Yeah, I mean, it's where I actually tried to broaden the view a bit from one that obviously for co-ops, it's hyper local, right? It's about communities having a vision for themselves that addresses the needs and services that are needed in that community. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And we do also sit in a larger movement, not only historically, but also globally. And so in the article as well, it's where I kind of said, all right, I want to step back for a moment and say, okay, what are the things that the guidance that is coming from, say, the ICA guidelines, like the larger kind of international principles. Mm-hmm. And so if you'll bear with me, I think this is kind of answers the question, kind of the direction that I went in. The 7th principle of working for sustainable development of their communities also requires cooperatives accept responsibility for making a contribution of tackling poverty, wealth inequality, not only between developed and emerging economies, but also growing wealth inequality in nation states and local communities within with communities within which cooperatives operate. Hmm. Cooperatives are excellent at tackling poverty reduction, combating wealth inequality, because their very nature is to create wealth for many and not few. So when I was writing the article and just thinking about this, what I feel is that the principles are always up front and center. You mostly in food cooperatives, you walk in, you see the principles, like maybe they're on the wall, if you walk into the store, or they're in the literature, whatever pamphlet people might have. They're on websites. We talk about the principles. I love the principles too. And there is much more information and guidance about what those principles mean. In this case, we're talking about the seventh principle, and it is talking directly about poverty. They're talking about wealth inequality. The things that I think often when we talk about Principle 7, we don't necessarily automatically link to those particular systemic issues.
Yeah.
But I don't actually know why. I would love the opportunity to have these conversations and change the narrative a bit about saying, okay, well, what it means to be focused on community is so limited that we're actually not seeing all the ways in which we actually have to have concern for community.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up, as you were reading that, it's sort of like, it's our duty as cooperatives to look at the inequities in our communities and to address them if they're not addressed. That comes with participation, that comes with wealth inequality, and certainly there's over all of these issues is sort of this umbrella of how racist systems have impacted members of our community. And so I love that you shone the light on that, because it is interesting, like it's up to the individual co-ops how they interpret these principles, right? So that's where it's like, well, it's not always clear. Well, how do we actually interpret these and bring them to life? Because we are operating grocery stores, right? So I think you hit on something really important. And I think you also talk in the article about how things must change after the pandemic is over, and that the food co-op movement has to be in a different place, right? If we're really going to live our values and principles. And so I think beyond implying a lot of work that we need to do, it also, I think what you wrote implies hope for the future and evolution, and that you see a meaningful role for the food co-op movement going forward after our pandemic. So I want to ask you now to dream a little bit, fact-based dreaming, right? What's your dream about how our food co-op movement could look a decade from now?
I don't know if it's even all that different than what I kind of hope and dream for the country itself.
Yeah.
To me, it's about co-ops, the country, living more fully into its ideals, its particular principles. For the country, life, liberty, and justice, a pursuit of happiness in a way that, really truly is lived out, and all people feel safe in their communities, have access to the things that they need in order to thrive. And in terms of the co-op, looking at these 7 principles in a way that's much more integrated into the larger systemic issues that are in communities. It seems to me that it's kind of this interesting exercise, perhaps cherry picking, to look at the principles and somehow disconnect them to the larger systems of oppression, anti-Blackness, you name it, to disconnect it from those larger issues. It seems like it actually takes a lot of effort to do so, frankly. I'm not sure, because it seems to me pretty clear which actually leads to the interpretation and the representation as a whole, right? So I think there's often this kind of common narrative, right? Like, we talk about the history of co-ops. It's different. It's getting better now in terms of not saying everything started and stopped at the Rochdale pioneers, right? Like we're
Yeah.
understanding there's more there, but still nonetheless, kind of there's this kind of narrative that we can all tell, right? About co-ops and what it meant, and the first wave of co-ops and the second wave of co-ops and all of that and what it looks like. And I think that now, the future is now, to expand that view, right? To say, okay, this is what we've been, what co-ops have been, and we can see what they've done, what we've done really well. We can see the failings of also, we can also see the failings up to present. And now we can just dream wild, think big.
Yeah.
About co-ops that are actually truly representative of their communities, in which you're seeing more folks of color, multi-generations, different economic groups participating in a way that we don't see now. Yeah. That's not the exception, but that is the rule. Yeah. A part of what people are experiencing in a co-op, not only through shopping, but through membership, through leadership as employees or on a board, is what we don't see now, which is typically a very broad kind of representation of all sorts of different people coming into the co-op, participating in co-op in an equal way. Yeah. That's what I hope for. I don't, yeah, that's my dream.
That is a powerful vision and dream. Thank you for sharing that. And you know, what's exciting is, I would love Jacqueline to answer this too, but you know, we work with food co-op, lots of startup food co-ops, and the things that you're talking about, I've seen a shift in the communities organizing food co-ops, that they, in one of their core values that is leading them to organize food co-ops, is around justice and equity issues. And that's frankly a little bit new for the food co-op movement, of the top reasons why people are organizing. So it's exciting.
It is exciting, but it's to me almost perplexing. Like, it's part of the reason, you know, that the article isn't, it is kind of this pondering, right? Like these ideas and kind of questioning and wondering, right? Because it seems to me like, well, why would it be that it's kind of a shift? Why is it new? I don't understand. It is where we are right now, right? So maybe there's only so much that we can get from asking why are we where we are right now, but maybe there is something to at least examining a little bit about why it could be that when given this incredibly powerful tool of cooperative behavior economics businesses, that throughout the world is often used in terms of social injustice movements, that there's been such a disconnect, you know, at least in the last few decades, of connecting food co-ops to social justice and economic justice movements.
Yeah. It's a very good question, and it needs to be discussed more. And I would love to discuss sometime. I've thought for many years about how we define community, because at the root of co-ops is we form, you know, we get together and we form these solutions to serve our community. And so I think there's a very interesting conversation about where we get lost in defining community that you've touched on here today. And I know you actually have another article coming. So first, I want to read the very last line of this article, and it's a powerful line, and this is where it ends for this article. For the co-op movement to truly live out its principles and become a more powerful tool for wealth equality, Black co-op leaders need more space and power. It's a really interesting place to end the article, but I know it's your jump off point for your next. Can you talk about why you ended there and what's coming next in this article series?
Yeah, there was so many different directions. Like there was a lot in this article, and so many different directions that I knew I could go in. No one was probably going to be interested in reading 50-page article, so I decided to keep it shorter, and then think about follow-up things. Like what are other things that I'm really super curious about? And one of them is, I'm coming into this work now as a consultant and a big fan of co-ops. But for leaders of color who are currently organizing right now, like what are the skills and talents that I'd love to be able to talk about that they have, that they're bringing to community? What are the different ways in which they're interpreting principles of the cooperative movement? How are they defining community? I mean, there's so many different questions. Like, I just can't wait to sit down and just ask, what's happening for people out there who are organizing now, and also share many of those thoughts in a way that I think might be helpful for the entire co-op movement, right? That these aren't for folks who are leaders of color, that they're in many ways, because of the issues, and they're so closely related to the social justice, economic justice, racial justice issues, that in many ways turning our gaze and learning from those leaders might be the way to kind of jumpstart our whole entire movement to actually shift and start thinking about this in a more integrated way. So I'm super excited to learn. Yeah, like I can't wait to hear what people have to say. There's so many great thought leaders out there. And so I'm excited about the interviews that I'll be doing, and I'm just contacting people and doing that type of thing. And then we'll hopefully be able to write an article that is really informative and really shines the spotlight on what people are doing. So I'm super excited about it.
Well, thank you. We cannot wait to read that article and to share it. And we're going to try to entice you to come back on and talk about that article when it comes out. So Darnell, thank you so much for joining us as our first guest on Food Co-ops Now.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. And again, Darnell is with the Firebrand Co-op. If you're looking to get in touch with her, you can find their website. I think it's firebrand.coop. Is that correct?
Correct.
Oh, correct. Okay, so you can always find her there if you want to get in touch with her there. I believe they're also on LinkedIn and Facebook. So again, thank you to Darnell, and thank you all for joining us and listening to this conversation. I hope you guys got as much out of it as we did. And this has been Food
Co-ops
Now. Keep cooperating, everyone.
Bye, everyone.